They called my son slow, but that wasn't the part that hurt most. The gymnasium air was thick with the scent of floor wax, stale popcorn, and the nervous energy of 50-odd children. I sat on one of the uncomfortable, gray plastic folding chairs, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, watching Leo. He was a small silhouette against the harsh glare of the stage lights, his shoulders hunched just a little, the wrinkled white note card clutched in his right hand looking like a tiny flag of surrender. Or perhaps, I hoped, a banner of quiet defiance. The murmurs started as a low hum, like bees disturbed in their hive. Then, as Leo simply stood there, blinking, adjusting to the brightness, the hum sharpened. Snippets of whispers, adult and child alike, pricked the air. Is he going to do anything? What's his talent? Standing? And then, the inevitable, soft, pitying laughter, like the rustle of dry leaves. Beside me, Miss Evans, Leo's fourth-grade teacher, leaned in, her voice a confidential murmur meant, I suppose, to be kind. He's just a little slow, dear. We shouldn't have pushed him. Heat, sharp and familiar, bloomed in my chest, climbed my neck. The urge to turn, to hiss back that Leo wasn't slow, not in the way she meant, that he saw and felt things with a depth that would astound her, was almost overwhelming. But I stayed seated. I kept my gaze fixed on my son. This was his moment, not mine. He had to find his own way through this. My heart ached with a fierce, protective love that felt too big for my body, a love intertwined with a knot of fear I constantly tried to unravel. Leo had practiced this. Oh, how he practiced. Not for Miss Evans, not for the rows of expectant or indifferent faces, but for himself. I'd hear him at night, after the lights were out, his voice a soft, sibilant whisper from his bedroom, the words indistinct but the rhythm steady, determined. He thought I wasn't listening, but I heard every hesitant syllable, every pause, every quiet breath. He was building something in the dark, word by word. Someone in the back of the gym let out a louder, more pointed laugh, a bark of impatience. I saw Leo's shoulders flinch, a tiny movement, almost imperceptible. He blinked again, his gaze sweeping, just for a second, towards where I sat. I offered the smallest nod, a silent message, asterisk I'm here. I trust you. Star. Then, he did it. He lowered the note card. Slowly, deliberately, his small hand unclenched, and the card drifted down to his side. He lifted his chin, just a fraction, and looked straight out, not at the blinding lights, but into the shadowed space where the audience sat. Where we sat. And he spoke. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It wasn't polished. But it was clear, and it sliced through the remnants of laughter, through the impatient shuffling, like a single, pure note. The room, which had been a sea of restless sound, fell into a sudden, profound hush. For the first time that evening, perhaps for the first time in a long time for many of them, they didn't just see a boy standing awkwardly on a stage. They heard him. The sting of Miss Evans's words, he's just a little slow, still resonated. But it wasn't the label itself that had always been the deepest cut. It was the casual erasure that accompanied it, the way it gave people permission to stop looking, to stop listening, to stop expecting. It was the way the world seemed to shrink around him, doors quietly closing before he even had a chance to reach for the handle. That was the part that hurt most, watching him navigate a world that often prejudged and dismissed him based on a perception of pace, not potential. My mind drifted back, as it often did, to the day the talent show flyer came home, tucked into Leo's backpack amidst crumpled worksheets and a half-eaten apple. It was printed on bright yellow paper, cheerful and loud, listing categories like singing sensation and dazzling dancer. I'd seen him trace the outline of a star on the flyer with his finger, his expression unreadable. Are you thinking about the talent show, sweetie? I'd asked, my voice carefully neutral. We were in the kitchen, the late afternoon sun slanting through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of cinnamon from the cookies I was baking hung warmly around us. He'd nodded, a small, jerky movement, still not looking at me. Maybe. A familiar protectiveness surged. School events were a minefield. Parent-teacher conferences where his quietness was mistaken for incomprehension. Sports days where his deliberate movements were out of sync with the frantic energy of other children. Birthday parties where I'd find him sitting slightly apart, observing the chaos with an unnerving stillness, his eyes taking in details everyone else missed. I remembered one such party, years ago, when he was barely 6. He'd been by the refreshment table, watching the other children play a boisterous game. One of the parents had clucked sympathetically, "He's a bit overwhelmed, isn't he?" Later, When a prize for the game went missing, it was Leo who quietly pointed to where it had rolled, unseen, under a bush. He hadn't been overwhelmed. He'd been seeing. "What would you like to do, Leo?" I'd asked, trying to keep the apprehension from my voice. He shrugged, his gaze still on the flyer. "Don't know yet. Just something." The conversation with Ms. Evans a few days later hadn't helped quell my unease. I'd run into her at the school gate, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. She was impeccably dressed, a kind smile fixed on her face, a sheaf of papers held neatly in one hand. "Mrs. Davies, so glad I caught you," she'd begun, her tone bright. "About the talent show." Leo mentioned he was interested. "Yes, he did," I confirmed, a knot forming in my stomach. "Well," she continued, her smile softening into something more solicitous, "that's lovely, of course. We want all the children to feel included. But I was wondering, perhaps something a little less performance-oriented? He's such a helpful boy. Maybe he could assist with the stage crew? Or hand out programs. We want him to succeed, of course, but within his capabilities." Her classroom, which I'd visited often, always smelled faintly of disinfectant and old textbooks. Everything was meticulously organized, from the perfectly aligned books on her shelves to the color-coded bins for art supplies. Her words, I knew, came from a place of perceived kindness, a desire to shield him from potential failure or ridicule. But they felt like the bars of a cage, carefully constructed around him, limiting his space, his possibilities. The phrase, his capabilities, echoed in my mind, a polite, sanitized version of "he's slow." "Thank you for the suggestion, Ms. Evans," I'd said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "But I think Leo wants to decide for himself what he can do. We'll talk about it." That evening, I found Leo in his room, not with the talent show flyer, but with a blank sheet of paper and a pencil. The soft glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows on the wall. He wasn't writing, just staring at the page, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you thinking about, love?" I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. He looked up, his eyes, a deep, thoughtful blue, met mine. "I want to do it, Mama." Not a plea, not a question, but a statement. Quiet, yet unshakable. "I want to be in the show." "Okay," I'd said, a lump in my throat. "Okay, then. What will your act be?" He'd picked up the pencil. "I'm working on it." His early practices were painful to witness, in a way. He decided he wanted to tell a story, a very short one. He'd written it himself, a few simple sentences on a piece of card. But stringing the words together, remembering the sequence, saying them aloud in a voice that carried beyond a whisper, it was a struggle. Pages got crumpled and tossed aside. I'd offer to help, to run lines with him, but he'd shake his head, his lips pressed into a thin line of determination. "I need to do it myself." I'd sit in the living room, pretending to read, but my ears would be strained, listening to the hesitant murmur from his room. Sometimes there would be long silences, and my heart would clench, imagining his frustration, his despair. Then, the soft sounds would resume, a testament to a tenacity I sometimes wish the world could see as clearly as I did. The pressure wasn't just internal. At school, when the topic of the talent show came up, Leo's classmates would fall silent when he was near. Not cruelly, for the most part, but with a kind of awkward incomprehension. I saw it in the cafeteria one lunchtime, when I dropped off a forgotten permission slip. Leo was sitting at a table with two other boys, quieter types like himself. One of them, a boisterous, confident child named Mark, swaggered over from another table. "Hey, Leo," he'd said, too loudly, "what lame thing are you going to do for the talent show? Stand there and blink." Leo hadn't responded, just looked down at his sandwich. The two boys with him shifted uncomfortably. Mark, getting no reaction, had snorted and walked away. The casual cruelty of it, the easy dismissal, made my hands clench. I knew Leo felt it, even if he didn't show it outwardly. He absorbed these things, these little barbs, and they settled somewhere deep inside him. My own internal conflict raged. Every maternal instinct screamed at me to protect him, to pull him out, to shield him from the potential humiliation. Had I been wrong to let him even try? Was Ms. Evans right? But then I'd see the look in his eyes, that quiet, unwavering resolve, and I knew I couldn't take this away from him. He needed to do this, for reasons I might not fully understand, but which were clearly vital to him. I spent more than one night staring at the ceiling, wrestling with my fears, my hopes, and the overwhelming desire to make the world a gentler place for my son. A week before the show, Ms. Evans approached me again during pickup. Her expression was earnest, her voice gentle. "Mrs. Davies, I just wanted to check in. About Leo and the talent show. Are you Are you quite sure? There's still time to, perhaps, simplify things. Or, as I said, he could be a wonderful helper. We don't want him to feel overwhelmed or embarrassed. Embarrassed. The word hung in the air between us. She meant well. I knew she did. Her concern was genuine, filtered through her own lens of what constituted success and capability. But her gentle persistence felt like a constant undermining of Leo's own agency, his own quiet strength. He's been practicing, Ms. Evans, I said, my voice firmer this time. He's chosen what he wants to do. We need to trust him. She gave a small, hesitant sigh. Of course. Well, just let me know if you change your minds. It was around then that I noticed a shift in Leo's practice. The story he'd initially written seemed to be set aside. I'd catch him in his room, not with the original note card, but with a fresh one, and he wouldn't be reciting lines. He'd be muttering to himself, disconnected phrases, observations. Sometimes he'd just sit in silence, looking out his window, then jot down a single word or a small, almost abstract drawing. One evening, I found his original note card, the one with the simple story, in the recycling bin, slightly crumpled. In its place on his desk was a new one. It had fewer words, written in his careful, slightly laborious handwriting. The words themselves were different. Not a narrative, but something more direct, more observational. I didn't ask. I sensed he was navigating this in his own way, and my intrusion might break the delicate thread of his concentration. He was no longer just memorizing. He was crafting something from the core of his own experience. The school held a brief, informal rehearsal in the gym a few days before the show. It was chaotic, with children running around, teachers trying to impose order, and the screech of the microphone being adjusted. Leo's turn came near the end. He walked onto the makeshift stage, note card in hand. Ms. Evans, who was overseeing that segment, smiled encouragingly, but I saw her glance at the clock. All right, Leo, let's see what you have. We don't have a lot of time. He stood there for a moment, just as he would on the night, blinking a little. Then he started to speak, his voice barely audible in the vast, echoing space. He got out 2 or 3 words, then faltered. Louder, Leo, dear, Ms. Evans called out, her voice echoing. We can't hear you. He tried again, a little louder, then stopped, looking down at his card. Perhaps, Ms. Evans said, after a moment of awkward silence, her voice gentle but firm, perhaps this isn't quite ready, Leo. Maybe we can try again next year. I saw his shoulders slump. My own heart plummeted. But then he looked up, not at Ms. Evans, but at the empty chairs where the audience would be. He took a breath and said, clearly, though still quietly, no, I'll be ready. Ms. Evans looked surprised, then gave a small, non-committal nod. All right, Leo. Next, please. The night before the talent show, I sat with him in his room. The usual clutter of books and Lego bricks was surprisingly tidy. His final note card lay on his desk, pristine. Are you nervous, sweetie? I asked, stroking his hair. It was soft, the color of summer hay. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the card. A little. But I need to say it, Mama. Say what, Leo? He shook his head. You'll hear. There was a gravity in his small face, a seriousness that belied his years. Whatever happens tomorrow, I told him, my voice thick with emotion, I am so proud of you. Just for being brave enough to stand up there. That's the most important thing. He leaned against me, a rare moment of him seeking physical comfort. Thanks, Mama. Later, before he went to sleep, I saw him through his slightly ajar door, sitting at his desk, the lamp illuminating his small, bent head. He wasn't writing or reading. He was just looking at the note card, his lips moving silently. He was holding on to his words, his thoughts, preparing to share them, no matter how daunting the prospect. The card wasn't a crutch, it was his anchor. And now, here he was. The stage lights beating down, the vast, expectant silence of the gymnasium holding its breath. He had lowered that anchor, his note card, and was looking directly at us. They call me slow, Leo began, his voice still quiet, but carrying in the sudden stillness. It was the exact phrase Ms. Evans had used, the phrase I'd heard whispered in corridors and playgrounds for years. A ripple went through the audience, a collective intake of breath. My own breath hitched. He paused, not for effect, but as if gathering his thoughts, letting them settle before releasing them. His gaze didn't waver. It wasn't accusatory or angry. It was steady, observant. Maybe I am, he continued, his voice gaining a little more strength. Maybe my words take longer to come out. Maybe I don't run as fast in the playground. Maybe I need more time to think about things. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and palpable. Beside me, Ms. Evans was very still, her hands frozen in her lap. I could see some of the older children, the ones who had snickered, now looking uneasy, their smirks gone. But, Leo said, and his voice rose just a little, clear and true, when you go slow, you see things. Small things. Important things. Things that people miss when they're going too fast. He took another small breath. His eyes scanned the faces in the dimness, as if he were searching for understanding. I see when someone drops their pencil and no one else notices. I see when someone is sitting alone at lunchtime and looks sad. I hear the little birds singing outside the classroom window when everyone else is talking. He paused again, then looked directly towards where Ms. Evans and I were sitting. His gaze wasn't challenging, but it was undeniably direct. Sometimes, words come out fast from people. Easy words, like slow, or different, or not good enough. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. Oh, Leo, my brave, observant boy. But I wonder, he said, his voice now holding a quiet power that stunned the room into absolute silence. If you're going so fast, do you really see who you're saying them to? Do you see what those words do? He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't need to. His question hung in the air, heavy and resonant. It wasn't an accusation, but an invitation. An invitation to pause, to consider, to see. Then, he said, very simply, that's all. He stood there for another moment, small and solitary in the glare of the lights. The silence stretched, unbroken. It wasn't the awkward silence of before, filled with discomfort and impatience. This was a different kind of silence. A silence of impact. A silence of thought. I saw Ms. Evans, clear as day even in the dim light. Her head, which had been held high, slowly, almost imperceptibly, lowered. Her gaze dropped to her hands in her lap. It wasn't a gesture of defeat, but of reflection, perhaps even a touch of shame. Then, from a few rows ahead, a single, distinct sound. A clap. It was Mark, the boy who had taunted Leo in the cafeteria. His face, usually set in a cocky grin, was serious. He clapped again, and then a girl beside him joined in. Then another, and another. It wasn't a thunderous ovation, not the wild cheering that had greeted the flashy gymnastic routines or the powerful singing voices. It was softer, more hesitant at first, but it grew, a wave of genuine, heartfelt applause that washed over the gymnasium. It was applause that acknowledged not just a performance, but a profound moment of truth. Leo didn't smile, not in a broad, triumphant way, but a tiny, almost invisible softening appeared around his mouth. He gave a small, shy nod to the audience, then turned and walked off the stage, his steps still measured, still deliberate, but with a new lightness to them. He didn't look back. I was on my feet before I even realized it, moving towards the side of the stage where he would emerge. The applause was still rippling through the room, a gentle tide. When he came through the heavy velvet curtain, his face was calm. He looked up at me, his blue eyes clear. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Words felt inadequate. I just opened my arms, and he walked into them, burying his face in my side. I held him tight, feeling the slight frame of his shoulders, the beat of his heart against me. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his hair. He was still clutching the note card in one hand, slightly crumpled now from his grip. You did it, sweetie, I whispered into his hair, my voice choked. You really did it. He just nodded against me, holding on. The ride home was quiet. The streetlights cast fleeting patterns across Leo's face as he gazed out the window. The usual chatter, the recounting of the day, was absent. In its place was a comfortable, shared silence, a deep understanding that needed no words. He had spoken his truth, and it had been heard. More than heard, it had been felt. When we got home, he carefully placed the note card on his bedside table, smoothing out its creases. It wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was a testament, a small, powerful symbol of his voice. Later, as I tucked him in, he looked up at me, his eyes sleepy but content. Mama, yes, love. Do you think they understood? I kissed his forehead. I think so, Leo. I really think they did. You made them think. And that's a very powerful thing. He smiled then, a genuine, soft smile that reached his eyes. Good, he whispered, and closed his eyes. I stood in his doorway for a long time, watching him sleep. The world hadn't magically changed. There would still be challenges, still be people who misunderstood, who were quick to label. But tonight, Leo had carved out a space for himself, a space where his voice mattered, where his way of seeing the world was not a deficit, but a unique and valuable perspective. He hadn't just performed an act, he had offered a piece of his soul, and in doing so, he had shifted something, not just in the audience, but in me. My fear for him, while not entirely gone, was now overshadowed by an immense, quiet pride and a renewed faith in his resilience, his inner strength. They called my son slow, but now they'll never forget what he said.